it's Agent Doofus here, and today I want to talk about the Xbox One versus the PS4. I know what you're thinking, the Xbox One and the PS4 have been compared in basically every way, shape, and form since they were both introduced at E3 in their individual conferences. But the one thing, or one of the things that hasn't been talked about so much is their GPU, CPU, and RAM. Most people know or have some sense that the PS4 is more powerful than the Xbox One, but they don't really understand how. First, let's start with the CPU. They have the exact same CPU. They both have 1.6 gigahertz of AMD Jaguar base CPU. They're both octa-core, and they both have 4 megabytes of L2 cache. So they're same in the CPU area. For the GPU, this is where they begin to differ. The PS4 GPU is using AMD Radeon Liverpool, and the Xbox One uses AMD Radeon Durango. They're essentially the same for all intents and purposes, but they're just slightly different, so we're going to be there. The PS4 has 1,152 shaders at 800 megahertz, whereas the Xbox One has 768 shaders at 800 megahertz. So same megahertz, but different shaders. That's essentially the number of colors. So the PS4 can display more colors. You're probably not going to notice the difference between 1152 and 768, but just know that the PS4 has the option for more shades, and it's the number of different colors they have. Maybe the PS4 has 230 blues, and the Xbox One only has 200 blues. You're hardly going to notice that additional 32 blues that the PS4 has, but there's a difference. The key point here is the number of teraflops. For those of you who don't know, teraflops is basically how fast the graphics are processed and how well it's processed. The PS4 processes the graphics at 1.84 teraflops. That's teraflop per second. Whereas the Xbox One only has 1.23 teraflops. What does this mean? This means that the details on buildings as you approach them will become sharper faster on the PS4. If you're playing a game like Mafia or Borderlands or Watch Dogs, not everything is loaded at the exact same time. Buildings way off in the distance aren't even loaded by the CPU, so they don't even have colors or shades or anything like that. But as you approach them, more and more buildings will appear. Since they have the same CPU, the buildings will appear at roughly the same rate. But as you approach buildings, they become more and more detailed as you go closer. The PS4, the buildings are going to be a lot more detailed, a lot faster than the Xbox One shows buildings details. This won't have very many effects on smaller games, like definitely Call of Duty multiplayer, things where the map's already loaded before the game starts. This is going to mostly affect open world games like Watch Dogs and Sunset Overdrive, where as you approach buildings in Watch Dogs as you drive, the buildings will be detailed faster on the PS4. Lastly, I want to talk about the RAM. Everyone knows that RAM is basically what powers the system, kind of. It stands for Random Access Memory. And you've probably heard that they're both 8 gigs of RAM, but that's not the whole story. It's how they divide the RAM that's where they're different mostly. The PS4 allocates 7 gigabytes of that RAM towards the games, and then 1 gigabyte towards background downloads and party chat and things like that. Whereas the Xbox One allocates only 5 gigs of the RAM to the games and 3 gigs to background downloads and party chat and other background tasks. The PS4 also runs its RAM at a higher clock speed. That's 5,500 megahertz for the PS4 and only 2,133 megahertz for the Xbox One. This means that the PS4 is probably going to be running hotter and faster. So although it's going to load things faster and quicker, it has the potential to overheat. That being said, there is a rumor that the Xbox One, the developers at Microsoft are offering developers of games the option to either increase the GPU or the RAM. Increase that 5 gigabytes of allocated for the games to maybe 7, or increase the number of teraflops to something closer to the PS4. The Xbox One also has a slight advantage in that it has this thing called Cloud RAM, which is running at 102 gigabytes a second. This is kind of like separated RAM from the console. It's running in the cloud, and because it's so different, developers might not want to develop for it. It's going to be a lot easier to develop for the PS4 because it has computer architecture, whereas this Xbox One is its own unique architecture. I'd love to hear what you guys think, how this console war is going to play out, based on the fact that the CPU and the GPU, not the CPU, but the GPU and the RAM of the PS4 is about 1 point times better than the Xbox One. I see this as a problem for the Xbox One, and I'm concerned, not really angry at Microsoft, because I foresee for their future that not many developers were going to want to develop games for their console. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thanks. Bye.